The beloved sitcom Friends entertained millions of viewers for 10 seasons, chronicling the humorous misadventures of 6 young New Yorkers. However, many moments from the show haven't aged well when viewed through a modern lens. Join Facts First as we discuss the implications of moments from Friends that have aged poorly. Homophobic and transphobic jokes. Friends relied heavily on homophobic and transphobic humor that was considered acceptable in the 1990s, but now is seen as ignorant and hurtful. Throughout the show's 10 seasons, jokes were made about Ross's ex-wife Carol being a lesbian, often with Ross lamenting, "My wife left me for another woman." Chandler was consistently uncomfortable with the fact that his father transitioned to become a woman named Helena Handbasket, misgendering her with male pronouns, and cringing at seeing her dressed femininely. Overall, the show treated LGBTQ identities as abnormal things to be mocked, like when Joey and Chandler feared seeming gay after accidentally napping together. Same-sex couples were presented as strange and threatening. When Carol and her partner Susan appeared, the laugh track would play as if their relationship was bizarre. The show rarely humanized queer experiences or same-sex affection. Fat-shaming Monica. Monica's weight issues as a younger person were constant punchlines on Friends. In flashbacks to her awkward teenage years, Monica was presented as grossly overweight and ridiculous, with her friends making cruel jokes about her appearance and diet habits. An alternative timeline episode showed Monica as still morbidly obese in her 30s, depressed and unable to find love, promoting the toxic idea that being fat means being unhappy and unworthy of relationships. The show suggested Monica only became attractive and gained self-esteem after losing weight. Her friends constantly made references to Monica's past size, even when congratulating her on weight loss achievements. Her identity was so tied to her heavier former self that she remained the butt of fat jokes years later. Fat bodies were portrayed as sources of disgust and humiliation, with Monica's value implied to be contingent on thinness. Today, most viewers realize this attitude perpetuates harmful assumptions about weight and health. Racially insensitive plots. In addition to lacking diversity in its core cast, Friends often relied on racially insensitive humor, derived from shallow stereotypes. In one episode, Monica thoughtlessly appropriated cornrow braids, a style rooted in black culture, and Chandler hated how they looked on her, suggesting they're only attractive on black women. The show also featured very few non-white supporting characters or love interests over 10 seasons. Even when people of color appeared, they were typecast, like Joey's black girlfriend who seemingly shared none of his interests. Monica also wanted to name her future children with Chandler after famous black athletes, reducing black culture to entertainment achievements. The show's writers failed to consider perspectives beyond those of the 6 straight white protagonists. Joey and Chandler's toxic masculinity. Joey and Chandler often embodied the most boorish, ignorant traits of the 1990s masculinity. They frequently objectified, rated, and ridiculed women based on appearance, persistently judging women's worth by how attractive they found them. Joey treated casual dating like a competitive sport, bragging about scoring with women. They trivialized romantic relationships as conquests, keeping tallies of their sexual exploits. Meanwhile, they shamed men who didn't conform to macho stereotypes, like Ross's sensitive male nanny, and panicked at physical or emotional intimacy with other men. Their constant juvenile jokes and fear of vulnerability reinforced strict gender roles. While played for laughs, this normalized toxic attitudes about women, queer folks, and masculinity. Ross's incestuous crush on his cousin. One disturbingly running gag on Friends was Ross's romantic infatuation with his cousin Cassie, played by Denise Richards. When Cassie visits from out of town for several days, Ross becomes increasingly attracted to her. He makes inappropriate comments about her appearance and fawns over her in front of the rest of the group. Though Cassie doesn't reciprocate Ross's creepy feelings, he deludes himself into thinking her merely cordial behavior must be flirtation. During a movie night alone, with the lights dimmed romantically, Ross tried to forcibly kiss his own cousin, crossing major consent boundaries. A stunned Cassie pulled away, disgusted by his actions. But Ross faced no real consequences for his predatory behavior besides brief embarrassment. The show tried to spin this sexual harassment as a harmless joke, even as the studio audience groaned in dismay. Creepy student-teacher relationship. Another storyline that has not aged well involves Ross dating his young college student Elizabeth Stevens. Ross is a professor while Elizabeth is only 20. The considerable age gap and power imbalance already make their relationship inappropriate. But the show takes things a step further by having them lie to hide that Ross is Elizabeth's instructor. Though Ross knows dating his own student breaks ethical rules, he pursues the relationship anyway, abusing his position for personal gain. He arranges to bump into Elizabeth over spring break to take her on dates. It's also implied that he gives her higher grades than deserved, so she'll like him. Their secret romance is portrayed as forbidden and exciting, but viewed today, it's clearly an unethical abuse of authority on Ross's part. Rachel's mean-spirited competitiveness. For a show about friendship, Friends often had its female characters tear each other down out of romantic jealousy. Rachel frequently engaged in petty, competitive behavior meant to humiliate other women who got close to Ross. When Ross dated Bonnie, who used to shave her head, Rachel convinced her to shave it again right before an important event just to make her look less attractive to Ross. She knew Ross wouldn't like the bald look. Rachel sabotaged Bonnie's self-esteem and relationship just to eliminate a rival. She also bullied Ross's girlfriend Julie, leaving insulting messages on her answering machine. While played as comedy, Rachel's efforts to undermine other women's confidence reinforce the toxic idea that femininity is a competition where pretty girls can only succeed by being cutthroat. Jokes about serious issues like homelessness. Some attempts at dark humor in Friends have not aged well, touching on serious issues that would be considered off-limits today. Phoebe's difficult past living in poverty and homelessness was often mined for throwaway gags to get laughs at her expense. Phoebe was a child when her mother died by suicide and her father abandoned her, leaving her homeless as a teenager. But her friends make jabs at her shoplifting to survive or formerly living in a car, showing a callous lack of empathy. They focus on how her background makes them uncomfortable instead of having compassion. Phoebe's tragic story is presented as bizarre and humorous rather than moving. Ross's controlling ideas about gender. Ross often embodied the most stubborn, narrow-minded attitudes towards gender roles. He refused to let his young son Ben play with traditionally feminine toys like dolls. When he saw Ben happily playing with a Barbie, Ross panicked and tried to make him play with more masculine action figures. His fragile masculinity felt threatened by a little boy enjoying dolls. Ross also frequently made homophobic assumptions, worrying that a sensitive male nanny must be gay and effeminate. He was jealous of Susan being involved in raising his son with Carol, not wanting another male role model in Ben's life. Ross was never able to move past rigid assumptions that men must be macho providers while women nurture children. Now it's time to hear from you. Does this change how you think about Friends, or is it still just a funny show from the 90s? Let us know in the comments section below.